The afternoon sun has a way of stretching across the floorboards late in life, casting long, quiet shadows that don't lie. In those amber hours when the house grows still and the noise of the world fades into the background, a strange and heavy clarity often settles into the mind. You look back at the landscape of your decades, the frantic climbing, the desperate bridges built, the endless energy spent trying to keep certain people happy. Trying to stay visible in eyes that were always looking past you. And suddenly, with the quiet weight of years, a realization settles in. It doesn't arrive with a thunderclap. It arrives like the slow, cold clearing of autumn air. You realize that some of the people you spent a lifetime trying to save, trying to love, and trying to please never actually cared. It is a grief that catches you by the throat, not because it is sudden, but because it feels like an awakening from a dream you didn't know you were trapped in. You remember the years of quiet negotiation, the times you minimized your own pain so as not to inconveniences theirs, the birthdays you remembered that were forgot in return, the long, exhausting silences you filled with your own frantic warmth just to keep the relationship from freezing over. You told yourself they were just busy. You told yourself they were complicated or wounded. Or that love was an investment that required endless, unreciprocated patience. But age strips away the luxury of self-delusion. It forces you to look at the ledgers of your life with unblinking eyes. And the math of certain relationships simply never adds up. They were there for the harvest, but they disappeared when the ground turned to stone. They loved the version of you that served them, but they had no appetite for the raw, fragile truth of who you actually were. To sit with this truth in the later chapters of life is a solitary crucible. It feels at first like a profound defeat. You wonder how you could have been so blind, how so much precious currency, time, attention, youth could have been poured into a vessel that had a hole in the bottom. But the Stoics knew that the ultimate test of human maturity is not how much affection we can extract from the world, but how cleanly we can look at reality without resentment. The pain you feel in this moment of realization is not the pain of loss, it is the friction of your illusions rubbing against the hard edge of truth. They didn't change. They didn't suddenly stop caring. They were simply revealing their nature all along. And you are finally, beautifully, running out of the energy required to ignore it. Think of the energy it takes to sustain a one-sided devotion. It is like holding a heavy iron gate open against a relentless wind, waiting for someone to walk through who has already chosen a different path. Your arms ache, your back grows weary, and your hair turns silver while you stand there guarding an entrance that leads nowhere. The tragedy is not that they walked away, the tragedy is the sheer volume of life you bartered away trying to make them stay. We spend our youth believing that if we are just good enough, patient enough, or self-sacrificing enough, we can rewrite the character of another human being. We treat love like a debt we can pay on their behalf. But as the horizon of your life grows shorter, you begin to see the quiet vanity in that pursuit. You cannot love someone into valuing you. You cannot bleed enough to make an empty well run dry with water. There is a distinct silence that follows this awakening. It is the silence of a theater after the curtain has fallen and the audience has left, leaving only the empty seats and the dust motes dancing in the stage lights. You look at the names in your address book, the faces in the old photographs, and you see them clearly, perhaps for the very first time. They were companions of convenience. They were passengers who rode in your cart while your horses were strong and the road was smooth, but the moment the hill grew steep and the wheels began to creak, they quietly slipped off the back, leaving you to pull the weight alone. They did not hate you. That is the part that is hardest to swallow. It would be easier if there were an enemy to fight, a grand betrayal 2.2. Instead, there was just an absence. A profound, casual indifference that wore the mask of proximity. When you are young, you mistake presence for connection. You assume that because someone shares your blood, your dinner table, or your decade, they share your soul. You mistake the noise of shared history for the music of shared depth. But aging is a process of filtration. It is the slow, deliberate sifting of the sand until only what is heavy and real remains at the bottom of the sieve. The rest, the pleasantries, the transactional alliances, the fair weather affection is washed away by the current of time. It must be washed away. To carry the weight of unrequited devotion into your winter years is to clutter the small room of your soul with furniture that no one will ever sit on. We must ask ourselves without anger why we defended those who so easily abandoned us. Why did we construct elaborate excuses for their coldness? We became architects of their innocence, building grand narratives to explain why they couldn't show up, why they didn't call, why their eyes wandered when we spoke of our deepest sorrows. We did it because the alternative was too terrifying to face. To admit that someone close to you does not care is to confront a vast, cold vacancy in your life. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. It is far more comfortable to stay in the warm, crowded house of your own illusions, pretending that the lack of warmth is just a temporary draft. But the draft never stops, does it? It follows you through the decades, chilling you in the moments when you most need shelter. You feel it at the hospital bed when the phone remains silent. You feel it at the celebration when their congratulations feel hollow and performative. You feel it in the quiet conversations where you realize they know everything about your mistakes but nothing about your dreams. They were never fully there. They were ghosts you invited to sit at your hearth, and you spent your life wondering why the fire never kept them warm. The turning point comes when you realize that their indifference was never a reflection of your worth. This is the hardest shift for the human heart to make. When someone we care for treats us as disposable, our immediate instinct is to look in the mirror and search for the flaw. We ask, what did I fail to give? What part of me was too small, too loud, too broken? We treat their neglect as a verdict on our value. But a stone cannot see the brilliance of a diamond, not because the diamond lacks luster, but because the stone is blind. Their inability to care was a boundary within their own nature, a limitation of their own capacity to feel, to see, and to love. It had nothing to do with you. Imagine a man trying to draw water from a dry well. He lowers his bucket day after day, pulling it up empty, covered in dust. He doesn't curse the well for being dry, he simply accepts that there is no water there and walks away to find a spring. Yet in our human relationships, we drop our buckets into dry wells for 30, 40, 50 years, crying out in agony every time they come up empty. We blame ourselves for the dryness of the soil. We think if we throw ourselves down the well, perhaps it will finally fill. This is the madness of the unawakened heart. The wisdom of age is the ability to look at the dry well, gently set down the bucket, and say there is nothing for me here. And that is okay. Letting go of these people does not require a dramatic confrontation. It does not require an angry speech, a slammed door, or a grand declaration of independence. Those are the actions of a heart that is still fighting, still hoping to provoke a reaction, still desperate to prove its point. True realization is much quieter. It is the gentle lowering of the hand. It is the decision to stop texting first. It is the choice to no longer offer your deepest thoughts to ears that only hear noise. It is the elegant withdrawal of your energy from places where it is merely consumed rather than reciprocated. When you do this, there will be a period of mourning. You are not just mourning the loss of the person. You are mourning the loss of the story you told yourself about them. You are burying the future you thought you would share, the porch conversations in old age that will never happen, the shared memories that will never be revisited. It is a clean, honest sorrow. It hurts, but it is a pain that heals, unlike the chronic, grinding ache of trying to force an indifferent person to love you. It is the pain of a bone being reset so it can finally grow straight. Look at the trees in late autumn. They do not cling to their dying leaves out of sentimentality or fear of looking bare. They let them fall, allowing the wind to strip them down to their essential branches. They stand naked against the frost, trusting that their strength is not in what they hold onto, but in what remains within the trunk, deep down in the roots where the winter cannot reach. You must become like those winter trees. You must let the superficial, the indifferent, and the half-hearted fall away. Let the wind carry them off. Your beauty was never in the leaves they admired. Your beauty is in the life that flows quietly through your core, independent of whether they witness it or not. As the circle of your life narrows, you begin to see that a few genuine connections are worth more than a stadium full of applause. One person who truly sees you, who stays when the lights go down, who listens to the pauses between your words, that is where the wealth of existence lies. The rest is just social theater. It is the costume drama we play in our youth to convince ourselves we are not alone in the universe. But we are alone in the most magnificent sense. We are born into our own consciousness, we walk through our own private landscapes of memory, and we will leave this world through a door that only fits one person at a time. To spend that solitary journey begging for the attention of those who cannot see you is an insult to the sacred nature of your own existence. There is a profound dignity that returns to you when you stop begging. Your shoulders drop. Your jaw unclenches. You no longer enter rooms wondering if you are liked, you enter rooms wondering if you like the company. You no longer edit your thoughts to fit the narrow margins of someone else's comfort zone. You speak your truth or you choose silence, but both belong entirely to you. You realize that your time is no longer a renewable resource. You have fewer days ahead of you than you have behind you, and that realization makes every hour an extraordinary luxury. Why would you give even 5 minutes of that luxury to someone who treats your presence like a chore? Think of the people who never cared as teachers of a very specific, brutal kind of wisdom. They were sent into your life to teach you how to survive your own longing. They were the friction that forced you to develop internal traction. Without their coldness, you might have remained forever dependent on the warmth of external approval. You would have gone to your grave believing that your value was something to be negotiated in the marketplace of other people's opinions. Their indifference was the knife that cut the strings of your dependency, forcing you to stand on your own 2 feet, even if those feet are now tired and worn. We often carry a secret hope that one day they will understand. We imagine a moment of dramatic reckoning where they look at us, tears in their eyes, and say, "I see now how much you loved me, and how much I failed you." We play this scene out in our minds while driving, while washing dishes, while staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. But wisdom means recognizing that this scene belongs to the theater of children. In the real world, the people who didn't care rarely wake up. They do not have a sudden epiphany. They simply grow older within the same narrow walls of their own self-absorption. If you wait for their apology to find your peace, you will spend the rest of your life in their waiting room. Your freedom cannot be contingent on their awakening. The greatest act of self-respect you can offer yourself in the second half of life is to grant these people total amnesty. Not because they earned it, and not because what they did was right, but because your soul is too heavy to carry their debt any longer. Forgive them for their inability to see you. Forgive them for their smallness. And then turn your back to them and walk toward the light that remains. There are gardens still to be tended. There are books still to be read. There are paths through the woods that do not care about your past, and there is a quiet, steady peace waiting for you in the company of those who have always known your value without you ever having to explain it. When you look back now, let the resentment go. It is a hot coal you have been holding in your hand, waiting to throw at them, but it has only ever burned you. Drop it on the grass. Let it cool. Look at the empty spaces they left in your life and see them not as wounds, but as clearings. Clearings where something new can grow. Clearings where you can finally sit in the sun, breathe deeply, and realize that you are completely, beautifully free. The silence that once felt like loneliness begins to feel like a sanctuary. You look around your home at the objects you've gathered, the plants you've watered, the few true friends who still answer the phone on the first ring, and you realize that this is enough. It was always enough. The tragedy was never that they didn't care. The tragedy was that you thought their care was the missing piece of your puzzle. But the puzzle was completed the moment you stopped looking outside for the final piece and realized it was already in your hand. Let the evening come. Let the shadows lengthen across the floorboards. You have run your race, you have fought your battles, and you have finally laid down the burdens that were never yours to carry. The people who never cared are part of the scenery you've left behind on the road. Do not look back at them. The path ahead is quiet, the air is clean, and for the first time in your life you are walking it for yourself. As the night deepens, you realize that the most difficult part of this awakening is not the anger you feel toward them but the grief you feel for yourself. You mourn the person you used to be, the one who stood outside their door in the freezing rain of their indifference, begging for a crumb of validation. You look back at that younger version of yourself with a mixture of tenderness and heartbreak. You want to reach through the fabric of time, tap that younger self on the shoulder, and say stop. Please stop running. They cannot give you what you are looking for because they do not have it within themselves to give. But time only flows in one direction. You cannot reclaim the decades spent editing your own soul to fit into their narrow lives. You cannot rewrite the history of your own submission. What you can do, however, is vow that the remaining chapters of your life will belong entirely to you. You can decide that the currency of your remaining days is too precious to be spent on those who treat your absence as a relief and your presence as a burden. This is the quiet revolution of the aging mind. It is the moment you reclaim your sovereignty from the court of public opinion and realize that the only judge you ever needed to please was the one looking back at you from the mirror. We often mistake history for obligation. We tell ourselves that because we have known someone for 30 years, because we share a surname, or because we have survived a particular hardship together, we are bound to endure their cruelty or their neglect forever. We treat relationships like ancient monuments that must be preserved at all costs, even if they are crumbling and crushing us beneath their stones. But a long history is not a license for continued disrespect. Longevity without loyalty is just a long-term investment in your own unhappiness. As you grow older, you realize that you do not owe anyone your peace of mind simply because you used to share a past. There is a profound difference between letting go with hatred and letting go with clarity. Hatred is heavy, it requires constant fuel. It requires you to keep reviewing the injuries, keeping the ledger of grievances fresh, and constantly rehearsing the arguments you will never have. Hatred keeps you chained to the very person who hurt you, ensuring that even in their absence they still dominate your thoughts. Clarity, on the other hand, is light as air. It is the simple acknowledgement that a person's nature is incompatible with your peace. It is the understanding that you cannot walk a path of depth with someone who chooses to live in the shallows. When you look at them through the lens of clarity, the anger melts away, replaced by a quiet, unshakable distance. Think of the relief that comes when you stop expecting a blind person to see the sunset. You stop holding up the vibrant colors of your life to their unseeing eyes, hoping that this time, through sheer force of your will, they will finally look up and marvel at the view. You simply accept their blindness. You realize that their inability to appreciate the sunset does not make the sky any less beautiful. It simply means they are trapped in a darkness they cannot escape. You leave them to their night, and you turn your face toward the warmth of the rising sun. This realization brings with it a strange, beautiful solitude. It is not the aching loneliness of isolation, but the rich, resonant solitude of self-possession. You begin to appreciate the texture of your own days without the constant need for external confirmation. The cup of tea you drink in the morning tastes sweeter because it doesn't depend on a text message that never arrives. The book you read in the afternoon holds more wisdom because you are no longer reading it to find quotes to impress someone who doesn't care about your mind. You begin to inhabit your own life fully, like a landlord who has finally evicted a non-paying tenant and reclaimed the estate for themselves. In our youth, we are terrified of this kind of solitude. We see it as a sign of failure, a proof that we were not loved enough, popular enough, or chosen enough. We fill our calendars with noise and our rooms with bodies, desperate to drown out the quiet whisper that tells us we are ultimately alone. But the older you get, the more you realize that the worst loneliness is not being alone, it is being in a room full of people who make you feel completely unseen. It is the loneliness of the crowded dinner table where your voice is just background noise, or the marriage where two people are separated by an ocean of unspoken indifference. Compared to that agony, the solitude of an empty room is a magnificent luxury. Look at the old stone walls that run through the countryside. They have stood for generations, weathering the storms, the frost, and the heat of summer. They don't ask the fields they enclose for permission to exist. They don't beg the passing travelers to admire their craftsmanship. They simply hold their ground, rooted in the earth, beautiful in their rugged endurance. You must become that stone wall. Let the storms of other people's moods blow over you. Let their indifference wash against your face like rain. It cannot diminish the density of your character unless you allow it to penetrate the mortar of your self-respect. The people who never cared were often people who used your kindness as a cushion for their own comfort. They knew exactly which buttons to push to activate your guilt, your sense of duty, or your fear of abandonment. They treated your generosity not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be mined. And as long as the supply was endless, they remained pleasant. But the moment you erected a boundary, the moment you said no, or the moment your own life required you to stop giving, their warmth vanished like a mirage. They didn't love you, they loved your compliance. To see this clearly is to undergo a painful extraction. It feels like pulling a thorn that has been embedded in your flesh for so long that the skin has grown around it. The removal causes a sharp, immediate sting, but the moment it is out, the throbbing stops. The swelling goes down. The healing begins. You look at the scar left behind, and you see it not as a mark of shame but as a medal of honor. It is proof that your body and your spirit knew how to reject what was toxic to them, even if your mind took a little longer to understand. We must learn to live according to our own nature, not according to the expectations of those who do not have our best interests at heart. Nature does not apologize for its cycles. The winter does not feel guilty for freezing the lake. And the spring does not ask permission to bloom. They move according to an internal rhythm that is ancient and wise. For too many years, you have allowed your internal seasons to be dictated by the whims of people who were entirely disconnected from their own hearts. If they were cold, you assumed you had caused the freeze. If they were distant, you assumed you had pushed them away. It is time to disconnect your climate from their weather. As you step further into this clarity, you will notice that the space around you changes. The frantic energy of trying to prove yourself disappears, replaced by a steady, low-frequency peace. You no longer feel the need to explain your decisions, to justify your boundaries, or to defend your worth. If someone cannot see the value of your presence, you do not argue with them, you simply make your presence scarce. You understand that your energy is a finite resource. And every drop spent trying to convince an indifferent person to value you is a drop stolen from the people, the passions, and the quiet moments that actually sustain your soul. Let the morning come with its clean slate. You do not have to carry the ghosts of yesterday's rejections into today's light. The people who never cared have already moved on to find other sources of validation, other wells to dry out. Let them go. Wish them well on their journey. But bar the door to your heart so they can never return to disturb your peace. You have paid your dues to the world of illusions. You have served your time in the prison of other people's expectations. The gate is open, the path is clear, and the only person waiting for you at the end of the road is the person you were always meant to become. The house is quiet now, the kind of quiet that only arrives when you have finally stopped waiting for a phone call that was never going to come. For years, that silence felt heavy, like an accusation. It felt like proof that you were lacking, that you were being left behind while the rest of the world moved forward in a blur of laughter, connection, and warmth. But as the shadows lengthen across the carpet, you realize that this silence is actually a gift. It is the sound of an empty space that you no longer have to fill with the exhausting noise of your own desperation. We spend so much of our lives running from emptiness. We treat a lack of outside attention like an emergency, a fire that must be put out with any company we can find, no matter how cold or conditional that company might be. We accept crumbs from tables where we should have been honored guests. We sit quietly while people who claim to love us dismiss our thoughts, ignore our achievements, and treat our presence like a piece of old furniture they have grown tired of looking at. And we endure it because the alternative, the vast, uncharted territory of being truly alone with ourselves, feels too terrifying to face. But age brings a different kind of courage. It is the courage of a captain who has survived enough storms to no longer be afraid of the deep water. You look out at the open sea of your remaining years, and you realize that navigating the solitude is infinitely better than staying docked in a harbor where your ship is slowly rotting against the pier. The people who never cared were the anchors holding you in that stagnant water. They didn't want you to sail, they just wanted you to stay there, tied down, so they would always know where to find you when they needed a place to rest. There is a liberation that comes when you finally stop trying to fix things that were broken long before you arrived. You look at certain family dynamics, certain decades-long friendships, and you see that you were treating them like a puzzle that could be solved if you just found the right piece. If you were just a little more patient, if you gave a little more money, if you listened to their problems for just one more hour, surely the picture would come together. But some things aren't puzzles, they are just broken glass. No matter how carefully you try to arrange the shards, they will never form a beautiful image again. They will only cut your fingers every time you touch them. It takes a long time to realize that you are allowed to walk away from the glass. You are allowed to look at a relationship that has brought you nothing but anxiety, doubt, and diminished self-worth, and say, "I am done bleeding for this." You do not need their permission to stop trying. You do not need them to validate your reasons or agree that the relationship is unhealthy. Their inability to see the damage they caused is the very reason you have to leave. Expecting an indifferent person to understand your pain is like asking the wind to apologize for blowing down the trees. It is simply not within their nature to care. When you withdraw your energy from these toxic dynamics, you will feel a strange sensation in your chest. It feels like lightness, but it also feels like emptiness. It is the absence of the constant, low-grade panic that used to define your days, the anxiety of wondering if they are angry with you, the stress of trying to anticipate their moods, the heavy dread of knowing that no matter what you do, it will never be enough. That panic became so familiar to you that its absence can feel like a loss. You might find yourself wanting to reach back out to provoke a reaction just to feel that familiar friction again. This is the moment where you must practice the ultimate form of Stoic discipline, the discipline of restraint. You must sit with the emptiness until it transforms into peace. You must allow the space to remain empty until it can be filled with something that is worthy of your soul. Do not rush to replace the indifferent people with more indifferent people just to avoid the quiet. Let the quiet wash over you. Let it scour away the grease of old compromises and the dust of forgot self-respect. Let it remind you of who you were before you began bending yourself into shapes that were never meant to hold your weight. Think of the relief that comes when you no longer have to perform. When you are around people who do not care, you are always on stage. You are constantly auditioning for their approval, trying to say the right thing, wear the right expression, and hide the parts of yourself that they might find inconvenient or unappealing. It is an exhausting way to live, a continuous drain on your vital force. But when you step away from their theater, the costumes come off. You can wear your old clothes. You can let your hair be messy, you can speak your raw, unpolished thoughts, or you can say nothing at all. You realize that your value was never dependent on your performance, it was always inherent in your being. The people who never cared were actually essential to your growth. They were the hard ground that forced your roots to go deeper. If every relationship in your life had been easy, if everyone had loved you perfectly and validated you constantly, you would have remained soft. You would have gone through life like a greenhouse plant, beautiful but fragile, incapable of surviving the first frost. Their coldness was the winter that hardened your bark. It forced you to look inward for the warmth that the world was refusing to provide. It made you the architect of your own sanctuary. You see this clearly now as you look around the room. The objects that surround you, the books that have kept you company, the music that has understood your sorrow. The window that lets in the morning light, they do not ask you to be anyone other than who you are. They accept your aging body, your changing mind, and your quiet spirit without judgment. And the few people who truly love you, the ones who have stayed through the shifts and the silences, they do not require you to perform either. They are simply glad that you are here, sharing the same corner of the universe for a little while longer. As you move into the twilight of your life, let your primary goal be the preservation of your inner peace. Let everything else, the pursuit of status, the need to be right, the desire to correct old misunderstandings, fall away like autumn leaves. You do not have the time or the energy to waste on things that do not nourish your heart. Let the indifferent people have the last word. Let them believe whatever story they need to tell themselves to justify their coldness. It doesn't matter anymore. Their opinion of you is none of your business. Your only business now is to live as beautifully, as cleanly, and as truthfully as you can in the time you have left. The world outside will continue to be noisy. People will continue to chase illusions, build monuments to their own vanity, and use each other as stepping stones for their own ambitions. You cannot change human nature, and you cannot fix a world that is designed to break hearts. But you can control the perimeter of your own life. You can decide who is allowed to cross the threshold of your mind. You can bar the door to indifference and open the windows to grace. Let the night come completely now. The stars are beginning to appear through the window, cold and distant, yet beautiful in their ancient certainty. They have looked down on billions of human lives, billions of lonely evenings, and billions of quiet realizations just like this one. They do not pity us for our struggles, nor do they celebrate our victories. They simply shine, fulfilling their nature in the darkness. You must do the same. Shine with the quiet light of a soul that has discovered its own worth, independent of whether anyone else ever notices. You are home now within yourself, and that is the only home that ever truly mattered. The deep, velvet stillness of midnight brings a final, unvarnished truth that the busy daylight hours always managed to hide. When you stop fighting the indifference of others, you notice that a profound change occurs within your own body. The phantom weight you carried in your chest for decades, the constant, low-frequency vibration of waiting to be noticed, waiting to be understood, waiting to be valued, suddenly stops. The engine of your anxiety finally runs out of fuel. In that silence, you realize that the greatest deception you ever fell for was not that they didn't care, it was the belief that you needed them to care in order to be whole. We live in a culture that treats the human heart like an open account, constantly requiring deposits from the outside world to stay solvent. We are told that our worth is the sum total of the glances we catch, the invitations we receive, and the loyalty we can extract from those around us. But as you watch the moonlight track its slow, silver path across your wall, you see the beautiful fallacy in that design. You are not a vessel to be filled by the casual affection of others. You are the source. The warmth you were so desperately trying to coax out of their cold hands was always originating from your own chest. You were merely projecting your light onto a wall that was too dark to reflect it back. Consider the absolute freedom of no longer needing to be understood. When you are young, you waste an ocean of words trying to explain your motives, your pain, and your innocence to people who have already decided to misinterpret you. You write long letters that are skimmed and thrown away. You engage in circular arguments that leave you drained and defeated. You scream into a void, hoping that if you just find the exact right combination of words, the wall will crumble. But wisdom is the moment you close your mouth, look at the person who refuses to understand you, and realize that their misunderstanding is not a problem for you to solve. It is their chosen home. Let them live in it. This realization strips away the lingering bitterness that so often poisons old age. Bitterness is nothing more than the rotting corpse of a hope that refused to die when it should have. It is their refusal to accept that some people are simply incapable of loving you the way you need to be loved. When you drop that hope, the bitterness goes with it. You no longer look at the people who are indifferent to you with anger. You look at them with the detached pity you might feel for a tree that cannot bear fruit, or a river that has dried to a trickle. They are simply acting according to their limitations. To hold a grudge against them for being cold is as foolish as being angry at the winter for bringing the snow. There is an exquisite dignity in this final surrender. It is not the surrender of the defeated soldier who throws down his arms in despair. It is the surrender of the wise ruler who realizes that the territory he was fighting for is nothing but barren rock, and turns his attention back to the fertile kingdom within his own borders. You begin to cultivate your own soil with a tenderness you never allowed yourself when you were busy chasing shadows. You listen to the music that makes your own soul vibrate, regardless of whether anyone else finds it old-fashioned. You walk the paths that bring you peace, even if you walk them entirely alone. You become your own most faithful companion. This is the hidden treasure buried at the bottom of the painful realization that certain people never cared. It forces you to become the person who cares for you. It forces you to step into the role of the protective elder for your own vulnerable soul. You look back at all the times you allowed your boundaries to be crossed, all the times you smiled through tears just to keep the peace. And you gently put your hand on your own shoulder and say never again. You become fiercely protective of your remaining peace. You realize that a single hour of quiet contentment is worth more than a lifetime of superficial popularity. Let the world outside your window chase its glittering prizes. Let the people who ignored you continue to seek their own reflection in the eyes of others. Their journey is theirs, and your journey is yours. The threads that bound you to their approval have been cut not by their cruelty but by your own awakening. You are no longer an actor in their play, you are the author of a completely new story, one that is writ in the quiet vocabulary of acceptance, self-respect, and unshakable inner calm. As the first faint lines of dawn begin to touch the edges of the sky, signaling the arrival of a new day, you feel a deep, settling comfort. The long night of wrestling with the past is over. You do not look back at the clearing with regret for what was lost, but with gratitude for what was found. You have found yourself. You have arrived at the only destination that ever truly mattered, the shelter of your own soul, fully realized, beautifully detached, and profoundly at peace with the world exactly as it is.